If you have ever wondered what the world would be like if you were the size of an ant, then I have just the place for you. This amazing work of art is located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and is the crown jewel of the Twin Cities Model Railroad Club, which has existed for over 80 years.
This is would be the Great Northern Depot downtown, is that right?
Correct, yep. It was, we're depicting the 40s and 50s when there was both steam and diesel engines that were still running the rails.
We got the street lights are on now and depicted in various fashion. It's just incredible.
This amazing layout represents the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul circa early 1950s, when the transition from steam power to diesel power was nearing its end. The detail is absolutely amazing.
Each of these pieces of railroad, each of these ties that go into place, were all individually cut. It's not like sections of track that were put together.
Right. No, when this was built in the early 80s, every individual tie was cut, stained, put down. The rails were then put down on top and individually hand spiked in, just like the real railroads.
Most of the buildings and bridges are modeled from the actual structures on which they are based.
All of the buildings that are essentially on the inside of the barrier here are all handcrafted. They're not something that was bought as a model or something like that.
Correct. All the buildings were made using old blueprints of actual buildings and then scaled down to size. So
tell me about the White Castle.
Yeah, the White Castle was built out of plastic sheets, but they took blueprints of the actual White Castle, scaled it down to this scale, and then built a little model of it.
Every now and then, trolley car comes down here, and it's actually running off these fine wires here.
Off the overhead line, just like the real trolleys would. Yep, right now we're calling this the town of Hamlin, but it depicts any neighborhood in St. Paul or Minneapolis that had the trolleys running through it.
The layout is considered O scale, or 1/48 scale. It is basically the scale of the classic toy trains many people my age or older received from Santa. Model railroad expert Roundhouse Rick Krenske explains the difference between toy trains and model trains.
Model railroading, you're sort of like trying to make a railroad scene as realistic as you can. But in our toy trains, that's what we grew up with. You know, we had a Lionel train or something running around the tree, or Dad put a 4x8 layout together, and you know, that was our little train world.
Roundhouse Rick's love of trains was a natural for him.
Well, I grew up next to trains in southeast Minneapolis. There were 12 tracks there. 6 of them were Chicago Northwestern and 6 were the Great Northern. And at about 8 years old, I made friends with an engineer, and he used to give me rides on his switch engine when he shuttled cars back and forth in the yards.
This layout is solely run by volunteers. Take Arnie Hochhalter, who's been a model railroad hobbyist since 1965. He has spent hundreds of hours on this layout, which at any given moment can have up to 7 trains running at the same time.
Some of it seems like art almost.
It is. Some of it is art. You notice some of the stuff around this layout is really well done artistically. And I enjoy putting the models together and just, you know, painting them and making them look like the real thing.
This work of art is enjoyed by all, but for the youngsters, it is something quite special. A nice tactile 3D diversion from the Xbox or PlayStation.
Their eyes will just pop, and they'll start hollering because here goes a train, and there's another train.
The kids are completely fascinated by the trains. They'll follow them around for hours and hours.
As for this kid, I had one wish on my Santa list, and sure enough, Brandon granted it.
So now I get a chance to do what just about every youngster would like to do when they come in here. I get a chance to actually operate this train, right?
Yes.
Of course, you could just hand me a controller and tell me I was operating them, and I wouldn't know the difference. But so this is this train here?
Yes, it is.
And we're on a siding here.
Yep.
So as much as I love watching Gomez Adams smash a couple of trains together, I don't want to do that. Because what's the value of something like this?
This is probably a $3,000 engine.
I definitely don't want to do that. So a $3,000 engine. Okay, so then I just ease it slowly forwards, right?
Give it some power and send it on its way.
Give it some power. This is probably one of the longer trains in here.
It is, yes.
And then, of course, I would be at an intersection somewhere up there, and just about when I saw the end of the train, it would stop while I was still waiting. And of course, probably at that point, I really had to get to a restroom. But then it would decide to go backwards, right? Is this how I make it?
Absolutely.
Right? And then it would back up, and I'm still sitting at that same intersection.
And if you think this model railroad spectacle looks great in the day, you should see it at night.
Night Trains runs every Saturday from November through February, and it's Saturday nights 6 to 9 p.m. All the lights are turned off in the building, and it's just the lights in the windows and the lights of the trains themselves that are on. And Santa Claus comes to visit some weekends, so it's a really cool holiday tradition. We've been doing that for years.
Running only during the months of November through February, Night Trains turns down the temperature and shows our miniature cities a winter wonderland lit only by the tiny streetlights and the chugging trains. It is quite magical and a must-see for anyone under the age of 100. Could you imagine trying to figure out the electrical circuitry on something like this?
There's thousands and thousands of feet of track, miles and miles of wiring underneath to control all that, all the lights in every building, all the switches have motors. Yeah, it's a ton of electrical work, all made by volunteers, made from scratch. It's a one-of-a-kind system.
Unfortunately, our magic layout tale has a little bit of a Scrooge-like fate. It seems that after 30-plus years at their current location in St. Paul's Bandana Square, the Twin Cities model railroaders can no longer afford the high rent of this complex and have to be moved out in a couple of months. So they are currently looking for a new home. One of the challenges will be to take apart this massive structure without ruining tens of thousands of hours of work.
It's going to take a lot of people and then also a lot of money to put everything back together again. This layout has to be cut in all sorts of small sections so we can get them out the doors. This out here is going to be a real undertaking.
This is considered one of the great model railroad layouts in America and has been a fixture in the Twin Cities for more than 80 years. If you're interested in keeping the trains chugging across the miniature Twin Cities, please go to tcmrm.org. Now it's time for this old engineer to fire up the steamer and head on down the tracks. All aboard!
Life to the Max is brought to you by Life Touch. Photography for a lifetime.